First of all, let me introduce myself. My name is Russ Baxter. I'm the Deputy Director at DCR for Soil and Water Conservation, Dam Safety, and Floodplain Management. And I guess I'm sort of the MC for today's event. Also from DCR, we have on the line, there may be others, but ones that are there for sure are Wendy Howard Cooper, who is the Division Director of Dam Safety and Floodplain Management. We have our floodplain management team here as well, Brandy Buford, Michael Barber, Angela Davis. We also have with us Matt Dallin, who is working with Admiral Ann Phillips on the Virginia Coastal Resilience Master Plan. Sorry, Matt, if I got it wrong. And we also have from our Public Communications Office, who are working behind the scenes to make this webinar possible, Julie Buchanan and Mary Bishop. So thanks to all of them. And once we get to the Q&A session, you're likely to hear voices other than mine. But I'd just like to start off. We're going to do a brief PowerPoint introduction to sort of how we got to where we are here today, and then walk through the manual section by section and ask people to type their questions regarding the particular section that is shown up on the slide that you might have about that section. There may be ones that are more general questions, and we'll be monitoring the chat. And during this 2 hours, we will have a hard stop at 3 o'clock. We will be answering as many questions as possible. We will also be posting the Q&A on our website. In addition, it will inform the development of a Q&A document that we'll be preparing based on the questions that we get during this webinar and other ones that are coming in to the email address that we've set up specifically for this program. So I think that's that, but let's go ahead and get started. Just a few housekeeping things. I already mentioned that we're being recorded. Questions and comments, please put them in the chat box. And I said we're going to do a Q&A document that will be posted. And if you would please, as of course everybody has been through 1,000 webinars and online meetings in the last year, but if you would please make sure that your mics or phones are on mute. So the Community Flood Preparedness Fund was the result of legislation that was passed by the General Assembly in 2020. And it is an opportunity to allow Virginia to become more resilient. We are looking at prioritizing projects that fit in a variety of categories. We want to build the capacity of Virginians and communities and others that are eligible to apply for the grants, to beef up their capability of preparing and for and preventing flooding. And so it is really a landmark program. I liken it back to the establishment of the Water Quality Improvement Fund. This is going to be a good deal of money over at least a decade, we think. It's not all the money that we're going to need, but it is certainly going to get us off on the right foot and assist communities throughout Virginia to address a changing climate and the impacts of flooding, whether it be tidal or whether it be from storm events or whether it just be like it was in Culpeper the other day, 9 inches of rain in one day. So the source of the funds comes from Virginia's participation in the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, known as RGGI. We're one of 11 members. The General Assembly authorized Virginia to join, and we have joined with the other most northeastern states. We're the southernmost member of that initiative, and it organizes and conducts auctions in order to reduce power plant emissions of carbon dioxide, with a goal, as you can see on the slide, of reductions of those emissions by 30% in 2030. So according to the law that was passed by the General Assembly, this is how the money is divided that comes in from the RGGI auctions. 45% there in the blue comes to DCR. It ends up at the Virginia Resources Authority, but it comes to DCR from the auctions for the purposes of giving grants and also for the administrative costs that go along with administering this program. Half of the money goes to the Department of Housing and Community Development for energy efficiency improvements in low-income communities, low-income housing. 2% is administrative expenses for the Department of Environmental Quality to run the RGGI auctions and do what's necessary to maintain Virginia's participation in RGGI. And then 3% is carved off for DHCD, Housing Community Development, and departments. Actually, it's not DMME anymore. I keep forgetting the acronyms change. Well, actually, it doesn't change until July 1st, so that's correct. But it'll be the Department of Energy after July 1st, but currently the Department of Mines, Minerals, and Energy, which has an energy efficiency program. And so they get a little bit of money to help that in their interaction with the Department of Housing and Community Development. So far, since Virginia joined, there have been 2 auctions. The numbers that you see on the screen there are 2. The first is the total amount of funds that Virginia received from the RGGI auction. The second is the CFPF number. That is the approximate 45%, a little bit of rounding there, but the approximate 45% that is being deposited into the Community Flood Preparedness Fund. As you can see on the screen, there are 2 more auctions that are scheduled for this year. Those that are familiar with RGGI, I'm no RGGI expert, but the auction prices have been higher than expected. But again, it is an auction and it is based on the demand for the allocations that the power plants need. And so the auction prices are going to vary moving forward, likely. So to say that we're always going to get between $43 and $45 million I don't think anyone can accurately predict that. It may be higher, it may be lower. It is dependent on the auction prices of the RGGI auctions when those auctions take place. This is the schedule we're on. We've already met the first milestone. We released the grant manual not too long ago. Let's see, today's the 15th. We released it on the 4th of June. This grant round is 90 days, and as you can see, we're going to have overlapping grant rounds. We intend to open a second grant round on the 5th of August. This first grant round that began on the 4th of June will close on the 3rd of September. And then at the end of September, we will announce the first of the grant round awards. The second grant round, again, a 90-day grant round. So in November, we will announce the second grant round awards, close the second grant round and then announce the awards in December. And then we are hoping we've put 1/6/22, that may be a little bit optimistic, but we hope to start a final grant round as early in 2022 as possible. Right now, we're only giving grants from the fund, but a law allows for both loans and grants. And so any substantial changes we make to the grant manual that would account for and establish the rules for loans, which is a little more complicated. There's creditworthiness issues and all sorts of things that are beyond my financial understanding. But that may require us to put the grant manual out for an additional 30-day public comment period. So that may delay somewhat the early 2022 grant round that we're hoping to do. So that is the introduction. And so what we would like to do, I guess, is open up at this point for questions. You don't have to look at me anymore. And if you would type your questions into the chat, I'll go ahead and read those questions, and then we will have our staff or myself answer those to the best of our ability. I hope you will be gentle. This is the first grant round that we've done with this new fund. You know, we've worked a lot on trying to make the grant manual as understandable as possible, but obviously there's still going to be questions. And so we will attempt to answer your questions to the best ability that we can. So if you'll go ahead and start asking your questions, we'll go ahead and start answering them. The first question is the second round anticipated to be similar funding available to the grant round one? That has yet to be determined. We will be announcing at the beginning of each grant round. It is likely to be a little bit less. We have some obligations related to the administrative costs and some other things that weren't reflected in the first grant round. And so it's hard to say, but with each grant announcement, the beginning of each grant round, we will be announcing the total dollar numbers that have been allocated for that grant round. And also, I forgot to mention in my introduction, 25% of the funds that are available in any grant round are reserved for low-income communities, and that definition is contained in the manual. Let's see here. The question about the definition of low income, it's actually low income community. That is contained in the code and in the grant manual. And so we address that. I would refer the questioner to the grant manual. The next question is, are we anticipating 3 grant rounds annually? I think that truly depends on the wishes of the governor's office. Obviously, we will have a new governor coming into office next year. Our hope was, it's not outside the realm of possibility. There may be a decision that it'd only be 2 grant rounds a year. That question I don't think we can answer at this point, because I think all bets are off until a new administration is in place. There is potentially a new DCR director. That's an appointed position. The Secretary of Natural Resources is an appointed position, and everyone in that office. Ann Phillips is an appointed position. And then obviously a new governor may have ideas of his or her, well, it'll be his, I guess. There's only 2 men running now. It will be up to the new governor to make some of those decisions. The next question, should we assume that there be more emphasis on applying this towards the coasts or somewhat evenly dispersed? I think it's really important to understand that this is a statewide program. There may be localities that are, at least in this initial grant round, some of the coastal localities that have been dealing with sea level rise and coastal flooding and tidal flooding that may be better positioned to apply for project grants than others. But we are very much interested in making all of Virginia more resilient. And so I don't think that there is going to be a bias in this program. We're going to look at each proposal, you know, with through the same lens, and work with communities to build their capacity if they don't feel as though they're capable of applying for grants yet. Well, that's why we have capacity building as one of the grant requirements, or as one of the grant categories. And so many of you may already know this, and I don't know the geographic spread of the folks that are on the webinar right now, but some of the most significant flooding events that we have had in the last 3 years have been in Southwest Virginia. And so certainly flooding is not limited to our coast. And as I just said, Culpeper got 9 inches of rain the other day. And those things are not unusual. Pocahontas State Park was underwater a year ago. And so it is our interest to help communities throughout Virginia to become more resilient. Let's see here. can you clarify the requirements of CFM certification with each project? Wendy, do you want to address that?
Sure. The requirement is that the CFM in each locality has reviewed and approved each of these proposed projects to ensure that it meets NFIP requirements, not just that it meets the resilience goals of the community, but that it also does not violate NFIP requirements and jeopardize the community's standing.
Thank you. The next question, can these funds be used to study and obtain base elevations for approximated A zones? I'm going to turn that over to you, Wendy, as well.
Yes, that would absolutely be something that would be acceptable for communities to do. I would expect that it would be part of some larger scale project or some larger objective, not just to do the A zones, but that is absolutely something that is acceptable.
The next question, why do protection studies fall under planning? What's the difference?
I would ask for some clarification on that. I'm not sure who asked that because we did separate those two.
We thought we did. I've got the manual up. Is there a particular page if the commenter could put into the chat exactly where they're looking? That question was from Todd Fortune. We'll come back to that question. Wendy, if you could bookmark that question.
Hey guys.
Okay.
I just sent another message in the manual, page 8. If they are separated, and I was wondering why they're not considered one and the same.
Thank you.
Capacity building and planning are grouped as one category, particularly for communities who need that resilience planning, doing comprehensive planning, those types of things. Studies are just that, those particular studies that communities may need. We separated them just so that we could have the delineation between what particular types of things communities were doing. Is there some reason that makes a difference, Todd?
The only thing I noticed was that there was a different match requirement for the two under the regular circumstances.
Okay.
My thinking was if a flood study actually has action items attached to it, why would that not be considered a plan or a planning endeavor?
Okay, so for the purposes of this particular grant, we're putting emphasis on capacity building and planning for communities that need to build up to ensure that to the greatest extent possible, they have the ability to ramp up. And that is why we separated it out that way.
Thank you, Wendy. Next question
Thank
is
you.
if a locality is applying to develop a citywide resilience plan and has some low income, socially vulnerable areas, but not the entire city, do they qualify for the 90% match?
No.
They would not. I think they may want to think about presenting their proposals where there may be a grant proposal that targets the socially vulnerable area. And that would certainly, the entire city doesn't have to be low income, but if the project benefits that low income area as is defined in the code and in the manual, then that would be a different situation. But it would have to be a proposal that would benefit that low income area.
And Russ, just a note, there's no prohibition on any community submitting more than one application.
Yes, thank you. The next question, would you anticipate submitting an application for a second round if not accepted within the initial round? That's entirely possible. We don't have any idea how many proposals we're going to get and how much money folks are going to request. And so there could be a number of reasons that we don't fund a proposal in the first go round. It could be because the proposal is not very good. It could be that we don't have enough money. And so it could be that, they're just not quite ready. They don't really have anything that could be construed as a resilience plan, and are interested in a project. And so all of those things are possible. So I would say that, just because a grant is declined doesn't necessarily mean that it is not meritorious. It just may mean that we don't have enough money to fund everything that we would like to.
And generally, when we provide feedback to communities via either their approval with condition or denial letters, we would spell out what the reason was they were not funded. So if there was a deficiency in the application, we would tell you. If there was just insufficient funds to manage all the projects and based on scoring criteria, we couldn't fund your project, we would also tell you that.
The next question again is about low income. Can an entire county qualify as low income? I don't think so. We have struggled with this because of the way that the code, there is a specific definition in the code about what a low income community is. And it is mirrored, I apologize. It is mirrored in the definition that we have in, it's actually low income geographic area, that it's mirrored in the definition on page 6 in the manual. And so we're not limiting the size of the project for a low income geographic area, but we are bound by what the General Assembly has told us is a low income area. And certainly if there are ongoing, offline discussions that we need to have with potential grantees to sort of narrow their requests or give further guidance, we're always going to be happy to assist folks in getting, getting their numbers right and getting that definition to fit with the proposal that they're submitting. Let's see here. Somebody notes that not every locality has a CFM. That's correct. We will give grants to localities so someone on their staff can be certified. And I see Todd's reply. Are nonprofit organizations eligible to apply? No, they are not. The code is very clear about who may apply. It is a local government, or also we are allowing for state or federally recognized Indian tribes. But it has to be a political subdivision of the state that has been established by the General Assembly. So it is not just a county, city, or a town. There are other political subdivisions of the states, including soil and water conservation districts, planning district commissions. There are probably others, some of the municipal, Hampton Roads Sanitation District. I doubt they'll apply, but they were created by the General Assembly and are by code considered a political subdivision of the state. But I would guess the majority of our applications are going to come from county, cities, and towns, planning districts. I can't obviously say because we haven't gotten applications yet, but that would be my expectation. The next question is about in-kind match. No, we are not. The manual does not call for in-kind match. Let's see, the next one. Would the acquisitions of private residences located in a 100-year floodplain that have experienced flooding be an eligible project? Would the conversion of the land have to be in an area identified in the Conserved Virginia floodplain and flooding resiliency layer? I think I'm reluctant to speculate on what would qualify without seeing a complete proposal. But I can imagine that being within the realm of possibility. It is not necessary for the land to be identified in Conserve Virginia. There are limitations in the Conserve Virginia resiliency layer, but it is something that we still are using to help guide some of the decisions that will be made on some of the grant proposals. So again, I don't want to prejudge a hypothetical, but that does not seem to be something that would be out of the realm of possibility, depending on the nature of the project and the size and where it's located and a lot of other details that we would need to see in the proposal. Can projects be submitted by planning district commissions for grant funds that are regional, involving several localities? Yes. Districts, the only thing we ask is that the localities that are included in the proposal agree to be included. And there is materials in the grant manual where that is acknowledged, and that there just needs to be a letter of support or some other method. I can't remember specifically what we call for. Wendy, you may have it at the top of your head, but we just all ask that you're not asking, a planning district isn't asking for money for communities that don't want to participate in the project. Seems fairly obvious, but in any case. Next question, can you elaborate on the previous CFM question answer? Confirming ordinance compliance doesn't clarify the requirements for who the CFM is. The manual states it must be an must be an ASFMP or ASFPM CFM, even though 20% of the communities, only 20% of the communities have a CFM on staff. Again, you know, we want to build the capacity of all of Virginia, and it is our belief that having a certified floodplain manager in a community increases that community's ability moving forward. And so what I would suggest for those that don't have that, put in for a capacity building grant to get that. We're looking for the long term. We're looking to build capacity for the long term, and we think that that's a critical component of doing that. The question is, did you mean you will give grants to the community having CFM in their staff only? Wendy, can you take that?
Sure.
I need to scroll down in the manual, and that's on a different screen here.
Sure, we will provide grants to any community that has a need for a CFM through their capacity building category. We will provide grants to communities that have CFMs on staff. So no, it is not just grants to communities that have CFMs. We will provide grants to communities to build capacity to either train and certify existing staff, or hiring staff and hiring CFMs.
The next question is, can match be from federal or private funding sources? The answer is yes. And these funds, and these, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, Russ, go ahead, I'm sorry.
And the flip side of that is that these funds could be used to match grants from those sources as well. So, you know, we certainly want to leverage these funds as much as possible. And so I don't know, you know, what federal rules would govern the use of federal funds for match for state funds. I just don't know. But certainly I think that, if a community can acquire through private funding the match for the funds, that would be okay. The community or the county, city, or town, or excuse me, let me use the right lingo, the local government as it's defined is the one that, puts in the grant proposal. So they are responsible for developing the funding strategy and all of those other things. And so they're on the hook to make sure that those funds come through and that they can meet those grant match requirements.
And to expand on that, these funds can be used in concert with federal funds or private funds as match. What you have to be clear with, though, because if you're doing that, you're telling us that that federal fund or that private fund is matched to our grant. So the caveat to that is some federal programs may not allow you to do that. You also cannot double count match. So if you have a private source that's matching a program already, you cannot use that same dollar to match our program. Same thing with the federal fund. You cannot double count those dollars for multiple programs. There are specific prohibitions in federal grants that tell you whether you can use those dollars as match or if you can double count the match for that federal program for something else. So you need to be very careful about what you're considering for match. You also can't use these funds to match another project in this fund. So just think about that. There is a definition on page 10, item G, where it says grant funds may be used as match for other sources of funding. However, grant funds awarded from the fund may not be used as match funds for other monies from the fund, and monies used to match grants from the fund may not be used as match for other grants. So you cannot double encumber the dollars, either for the program or for the match.
Thank you, Wendy. The next question is, can the applicant's project partner provide the match? If so, would it be acceptable for this partner to be a consultant who provides the match through the partial waiving of fees? I don't think so. That
would be considered in kind.
That would be in kind, and we are looking at for a cash match. So I think if the consultant gave the applicant a bunch of money, that would be different, but we would not accept that as a match. Julie put one in from are the federal opportunity zones in Virginia a priority? I think it's fair to say that given the fact that 25% of the funds are dedicated to low-income geographic areas. I'm sorry, I keep hitting the wrong. I've got two sliders on my screen. I apologize for that. I think it's just fair to say that there is a great interest in ensuring that that low-income areas, opportunity zones are funded. I mean, there's we have lower match requirements, and 25% of the fund is dedicated for those areas. So I wouldn't say it certainly was a priority for the drafters of the legislation, or they wouldn't have sliced off 25% for those purposes. And that 25% doesn't go away. It will be segregated when the money goes over to VRA. If we don't receive enough proposals to spend all of that 25%, the money stays there and we will reserve it for future grant rounds. The question is, a capacity building grant will not be sufficient for many rural localities to hire and certify a CFM. I guess I would say there would be the opportunity for someone on staff to become certified. It may not necessarily require a new position, but that's something that we're going to have to, work with localities that don't have a lot of resources and see what we can do. But I don't think it was our necessary intention to say that you necessarily have to go hire somebody, but we would like that communities to have someone that works for that community, for that local government, to have that certification.
And Russ, I'd also like to point out there is no cap on the capacity building grant. So I'm a little confused about the rationale behind this question, and maybe John, you can clarify what you mean, because there is no cap on what communities can request for capacity building.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity to clarify my comment. When it comes to capacity building and implementation, they very often in rural localities don't happen in the order that you would like them to. So they may have a staff person that could certify as a floodplain manager, but that's assuming they don't wear 19 other hats. A lot of these rural localities are very spread very thin, and that's a large asking them to undertake a process by which they would certify a floodplain manager before they're ever eligible for implementation funds, although they may have priority projects that are even identified in their comprehensive plan or capital improvement plans that need money now.
Understood. I would ask that communities look at this as an opportunity to build more flood resilience in their communities, and that starts with having a CFM who is aware and trained in the requirements of the National Flood Insurance Program, and look at it as an opportunity to grow access to other dollars, not just this program, but other dollars as well. And also, because the CFPF will fully cover the cost in some cases, in some communities, depending on what is submitted to us, it may be the only way that some communities can get a CFM. It's just an opportunity for folks to really explore this to the fullest extent possible to make sure that they are building the capacity in their community, even if there are other projects that need to be done. Without having that CFM on deck to provide you the perspective of what's needed from the National Flood Insurance Program, it puts your community at a disadvantage.
There's a related question, the next one, about CFM capacity. Is there capacity for creating a shared position within a regional effort? Haven't really thought about that.
There's no prohibition on that. If that is what you all are doing, for instance, the manual says, and pardon me, Russ, for jumping in here.
No, go ahead.
The manual said that it's a locality hired position. So if you had a regional position that was funded by all of the localities, that meets that need.
Yep. Thank you, Wendy.
But that person would, however, need to be able to manage the needs of those communities. So it's not just someone who you all would hire to certify your projects. It would have to be someone who truly is working as the floodplain administrator type person for these communities, and not just someone who's certifying an application.
The next question is, can these funds be used for projects that are partially on state-owned property if it is a part of larger regional project with multiple partners? That's an interesting question. I'm not sure we had thought about that as being a possibility. Corey, I wonder if you might be able to give an example of what that might look like. Are you talking about maybe a if there's a state-owned building within an area that is flood prone, and they are part of the effort, or is it, am I thinking of, or is there something else you had in mind?
Thanks for letting me clarify that. What I was thinking is there's a locality next to a state park, and they both own part of the same wetland complex. And there's a potential for them to partner and work together. But, you know, part of the project would occur on the community's land, and part of the project would occur on state park land.
Yeah, I guess we'd have to look at that project. You know, the state-owned land would be unlikely to be ever converted to anything to what it already is. If it were a wetland or a forest, or, you know, most of the land, of course, not all state-owned land is undeveloped. I guess I'm living in the DCR world where virtually all of the land, except for some of the, you know, infrastructure development in state parks, is open space and natural areas. But there may be situations like that. I would think that the state agency would be, given the state's interest in building resilience, would be a willing partner. What the nature of that partnership would be is something I think would have to be worked out. The, you know, state agencies aren't recipients of these grants, aren't by law recipients of these grants, and so the local government, as defined, would be the recipient of the grant, and so it's just sort of hard to make a judgment without understanding more of a particular details of a particular proposal. The next question, would hiring a consultant to prioritize be eligible under the planning line? Yes, that we would imagine that localities, in terms of both in capacity building and in planning, may seek the services of third parties to assist them in those efforts. That's something that goes on, you know, all the time in local governments, in the development of comprehensive plans or revisions to zoning ordinances, or lots of other things that local governments do that bring on private consultants. So I don't see why that wouldn't be the case here as well. Wendy, the next one is, can this grant be used for an existing PDM grant, which I should be, but I don't know what that acronym is. Will the funds be considered federal monies, or will they be defederalized through DCR?
So I would say that if you have an existing grant at the time of application, you indicated what your capacity to match was, and you identified those funding sources. So I would say no. If you already have an existing grant and you have funds already dedicated, as you should have if you applied for that grant and received it, you cannot go back and supplant these funds for that purpose.
Thank you. The next question, are there going to be maintenance requirements for the CFM if the community uses a grant to get certified? What if the community can't afford to maintain the certificate after the fact? Again, somewhat of a hypothetical, but that may be the case. What I would say is that there is, you know, nothing that prevents the ongoing, you know, a future grant to be a different purpose. The first grant may be to get someone certified, and a future capacity building grant might be to maintain that certification. So there may be possibilities. There may also be other sources of funding that they would be able to that community might be able to access to do that. So, you know, we're not going to have enough money to do everything. We hope that communities, as they see the value of having a CFM on staff and someone trained in that, would make it a priority when they're developing their budgets. But of course, we can't predict the future of what every community is going to decide what its priorities are going to be.
Right, and I have to say too that one of the things that we ask for as in a capacity building grant is plans for maintaining capacity as necessary over the long term. So we would be looking for communities to identify strategies. There are some specific components for capacity building outlined on page 20 of the grant manual that we would expect to see come in as part of an application for capacity building.
The next question is that if a regional hazard mitigation plan is part of a locality's resilience plan, does the hazard mitigation plan need to be adopted by the local governing body to be considered by DCR to be part of the resilience plan? The resilience planning aspect is gotten a lot of internal conversation. We know that not everybody has a resilience plan sitting on the shelf, and again, we would hope that the planning grants and capacity building would allow for the development of those plans. During this first round, we do have the 5 criteria that are, if you look at Appendix G of the manual, that what we would hope to see. We do acknowledge that some of these plans may be, in some say, taking parts and pieces of other plans and putting them together. Our interest is just showing that the community is forward thinking, and we know that right off the bat we may not get a full volume marked so and so's resilience plan, but we think in Appendix G it gives a pretty good understanding to applicants of the types of things that we would be looking for during these as we begin this program, and that's likely to evolve into something a little more substantive in future grant rounds.
And I'd also like to add and clarify in this question, you're asking if it needs to be adopted by the local governing body to be considered by DCR to be part of the resilience plan. If you've not adopted it, then it is not really a strategy that you all have agreed to manage and live up to. So we would expect that if it hasn't been adopted, that there is some language in your application about why and when it will be adopted, if it's going to be changed or updated based on what you're planning to do in the grant manual. We should expect there is some narrative around that hazard mitigation plan because that should be one of the primary considerations when you are developing your resilience plan.
Thank you, Wendy. The next question, do historical areas or communities have the same criteria, or do they fall under different criteria like the Indian tribes? No, they would just fall under the same criteria. I presume the questioner is asking about specifically about designated historic districts or something like that. There is language in the manual where we ask that historic areas and historic structures be evaluated and considered as they're developing their grant proposals. But again, a historical area is just like any other area in a municipality or a county, a city or a town, and there is no special. There's nothing special in the manual that gives any preference or any other special criteria for those types of areas.
The only consideration would be, as you are developing your plans, your projects, that you recognize that there are specific NFIP requirements for historical structures. And Angela, do you want to chime in here about what those specific requirements are? Because as Russ said, there is no specific carve out for historical structures, but there are very specific requirements for historic structures when you are mitigating and you are an NFIP community.
That is correct. The historic structures will still need to be mitigated to the greatest extent possible without messing up their historic designation. And that will have to be coordinated with like a historic resources specialist within the community.
Thank you, Angela. The next question is, if a county hires a person to become a CFM, what is the duration of funding to pay the salary of this person? I think that would be dependent on what the grant requested. I don't think the fund is going to be in the business of permanently paying for the salary of a local employee, but I could see it within the realm of possibility of that certification and then some period that might be requested in the grant to get that person up and running, and perhaps partial funding of that position could be part of a capacity building proposal. We'd have to look at that and look specifically at what the grant is requesting. The next one is, would a private CFM that is hired contractually meet the criteria? Wendy, you want to take that?
No, the grant requires that it is a locally hired CFM, meaning it is a local employee.
The next question, could funds be used to rehabilitate or remove dams constructed under Public Law 534 or Public Law 566? Wendy, you probably know what those laws are.
Actually, I don't know what they are off the top of my head, but
okay,
the grant
good.
does allow us.
One.
Yeah, just in general, the grant provides the opportunity to remove dams or to rehabilitate dams if it is tied to resilience, stream restoration. There are opportunities to do that. What we would expect is that there is a study done ahead of a dam removal to demonstrate what that benefit is to the community, to the environment, to the restoration of floodplains and wetlands and those things before that would be considered a viable project. It is not a one-off grant to do dam removal or dam rehabilitation.
The next one, it just says existing grant application with a star. Nathan, are you there? Perhaps you could, was that in addition to your earlier question?
Yeah, that was a question as a follow-up. So we haven't attained the grant yet. It's still in that phase of, it hasn't been awarded yet. And that PDM grant requires a 25% match. So sometimes a lot of grant programs, you can't mix federal monies, but you can sometimes mix state and federal. So we're seeing if what kind of money this will be, and to see if we can use it to cover that 25%.
These are state dollars, non-federal.
I
Yep.
think just to clarify here, the PDM grant is a FEMA grant. It's a pre-disaster mitigation grant, if that helps.
Thank you. I should know that. There are too many acronyms in my business. The next question is, we are considering applying for a project funding for a regional greenway BMP to resolve a repetitive shallow flooding issue in a very low income neighborhood. The project would likely result in a letter of map revision, LOMAR. My question is, would this qualify for project funding even if the greenway also provides some water quality credits for future development in the area? Again, I don't want to be in a position of prejudging proposals, but we certainly recognize that there are going to be co-benefits for some of these types of projects. And so I think we would probably consult with DEQ, which runs the water quality nutrient credit trading program, to understand the interaction between the proposal that is presented for funding from the CFPF and how that may relate to any requirements the DEQ might have regarding the development or the establishment and certification of credits under the nutrient credit exchange program. So I apologize, I can't say, there's no yes or no, but certainly the first half of the question is something that would obviously, I think, be a project that would, would certainly qualify. Whether it would get funded or not, depends on how much money we got, all that. I already went through all those contingencies, but the second part of the question, I think, would take a little bit of homework on our part in communicating with both the grantee and with DEQ on that matter. The next question, can funds be used to install flood mitigation measures in authorized PL 534 and 566 projects? Somebody smarter than me probably needs to grab that one. Wendy, you want to take a stab?
Trying to unmute my.
Sorry.
These are, I guess these are the watershed projects. Again, we would have to look at it and see what it is that you're trying to do.
Yeah. I mean, on its face, obviously, this fund is in the business of mitigating floods, but I think we need to see what the proposal is relative to those projects, how they're funded, and all that sort of thing. So again, we're reluctant to give yes and no answers on proposals that we haven't seen yet.
And Bruce, are you talking about projects that are like the federal projects or NRCS projects, or what specific are you talking about here?
I've got some clarification there on down the list, but these are projects that are sponsored and owned by local entities. They're federally planned, federally designed, but projects that are existing in Virginia, all based on mitigating for flooding.
Yeah, we would have to look at this specifically to see what the requirements are. Are you talking about using the fund as a match to some of the federal projects, or are you talking about doing something in concert with the federal projects?
All of the above. There's some states. Okay. There's some states that have stepped in where the feds have failed to fund, and have picked the ball up along with the local county, and just taking the project. It's on the books. It's ready to go and implement it.
Okay. I think we'd have to see it. And the reason I say that, because I know, and Russ, you're familiar with this, on the dam safety side of the house, when we have NRCS projects for dam rehabilitation, some communities may not want to mitigate the dams to the NRCS standard. They want to mitigate to a lower standard, which in some cases meets the dam safety regulations, but it doesn't meet NRCS standards. So what we wouldn't do is provide funding to mitigate for a federal project that is below the federal requirements, as opposed, if that makes sense to you. So we would really have to look at what that project is. The manual is clear that if it's in concert with some other federal project or some other project, that you need to provide that information to us. So we'd have to be able to look at it and make a decision like that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Next question is, can we apply, in Paren's example, $200,000 in grant funding to set up a low interest or no interest loan program, meaning we take the grant funds and locally administer a loan program? It isn't a request for a loan from the fund. I don't think that would be something that would be prohibited. Obviously, the applicant would be on the hook for the proper use of those grant funding, of those grant funds. Maybe I'm wrong. Wendy, I hadn't thought about that.
There's some specific guidance in the law that talks about setting up low interest loan funds to communities and
That's right.
putting
Yep.
liens on their property and all of those things. So that is not something that's eligible with grant funds. That is something that you would need to do through loan funds, I believe. I have to go back and look specifically at the law for that, but that is not something that we would approve in this particular grant round.
Thank you, Wendy, for your clarification on that. That's right. There is specific language I'd forgotten in the statute. The next question is, how will flood resilience value be calculated for a value and scoring?
I think that is the piece that's in the Conserve Virginia model that I had reached out to Jason about. So we'll have to get back to them on that particular question if it's about Conserve Virginia.
Yes, Wendy, it is. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. To clarify the pre-disaster mitigation, see, I got it this time. Grant question, can this grant be used as part of the 25% grant match requirements?
It can be only after the grant has been awarded. I would not recommend that you, if you are in an application phase right now, indicate that you have 25% match from the CFPF because funding is not guaranteed.
Oh, and then the next thing is disregard the question. Sorry about that. Didn't scroll down far enough. Next question is, this is, I think, is clarification. Yes, it's just explaining what Public Law 566 is, and that's the Watershed Protection and Flood Prevention Program with over 200 existing dams in Virginia, but may more flood mitigation measures on the books. The project, these projects, I think it means to say, are all sponsored by local, county, state, and city governments. I think you had that colloquy a few minutes ago. The next question is, do stormwater capital improvement plans that use green infrastructure count if you can prove flood runoff reduction through a hydraulic and hydrologic model? This, I'll let Wendy weigh in on this one as well. You know, there are other sources of funding, for example, the so-called SLAF fund, the Stormwater Local Assistance Fund that is administered by DEQ, that is specific for stormwater infrastructure improvements. And so I guess we would have to look at the nature of the project and assess its relevance to this program versus its relevance to what may be perhaps a more appropriate funding source, such as the SLAF. But again, without saying a yay or nay on this, we would want to look at that, and we certainly are going to have a lot of conversations with DEQ about stormwater management versus flood prevention, where it's not a real bright line between the two.
Right. You can absolutely use this fund to do studies related to stormwater flooding to make your case or to build an application for stormwater funding sources. So I want to be clear about that you can absolutely perform a study to demonstrate or prove the impacts of stormwater runoff. But right now, we would look at this project. If it was truly a capital project for storm water, we would expect there would be some connection with that other funding source and not this funding source specifically.
That is the last question that has been typed into the chat. Obviously, if there are further questions, I will certainly willing to to wait for those to be tapped in. I just put up on the slide, since we were sort of jumping all over, we'd imagined we might go a little bit more chronologically through the manual, but that's okay. But we, just so everybody has it, we do have a web page that is set up specifically that has the manual, and then any updates to the program. We've got future dates for sessions such as this. We're likely to be doing additional training in the future as well. So that's the page that is listed there. And we're also asking that instead of people emailing me or emailing Wendy, if they would send email inquiries to the address that we have set up specifically for this fund. It just allows us to sort of make sure that we consolidate and see what's coming in and be able to answer those questions. Okay, here comes some additional questions. Let me move back over to that section. Next question we have, since we're now able to submit projects in our resilience plan concurrently until September 3rd, will you all, sorry, you got to put an apostrophe in there. Will you all still tell us within 2 weeks of plan submission if it is accepted or not? It would be good to have confirmation on the plan prior to the work to put the project together. That is the case. They could be submitted concurrently. What we would implore potential applicants is to send in their resilience plan prior to submitting their proposals. There is not a deadline, but I think it would be to their benefit for us to have the ability to look at it and get back to the applicant as quickly as we can. And so we would not recommend them being submitted concurrently, even though the manual does allow for that. But I think it would be to the benefit of an applicant to spend a little bit of time at the front end with the plan submission prior to the close of the grant period on September 3rd.
And I would echo that because what you may run into if you submit your plan at the time of application is that you may get a denial for your project because the resilience plan is not adequate and there's no additional time for you to cure your application. So I would strongly urge you all to submit those resilience plans as soon as possible.
The next question is, let's see here. Oops, just moved a little bit. Excuse me, let me get my scrolling right. Do the projects have to address a repetitive loss area? No, they don't have to.
They do not, I would like to elaborate there. They do not have to address a repetitive loss area. But if you are not addressing a repetitive loss area, there should be some narrative about why you are not doing so. Do you not have repetitive loss in your community and you're choosing not to address it? Why would you not address the most severe situations in your community first? Not to say that we won't fund something that doesn't address repetitive loss, but there must be some narrative around why you are not addressing that specific area.
Thank you, Wendy. Do you collaborate with the localities if the need arises to alert that a problem exists that is a critical need if there is a public cry by local residents that are not being heard? I think what the question is getting to is if there is a section of a community that is not being heard by their governing body or the potential applicant to the fund, is there some way around that? Our hope is that localities will take seriously what the General Assembly has intended with this law, and that is to look at communities holistically, to look at communities and areas in communities that have been traditionally underserved or ignored. You know, it's really hard to answer that question. All I can say is that it is certainly a priority of this program to address issues and flooding issues, and obviously, particularly in areas that may not have received the kind of attention in the past that they should have. And so I suspect we will be getting information and inquiries from local residents in addition to potential applicants. We will no doubt be alerted to. We have, you know, a network of staff now that have direct lines into community, you know, work with communities. And so, you know, we're gonna keep our ears open. But it is by law the local government as defined that is the one that presents the application to the fund. But again, I think it's fairly clear in the grant manual. It's certainly fairly clear in the Code of Virginia that a good portion of these monies, 25%, are being set aside for areas that are likely to have been traditionally underserved. And so maybe that's the best answer I can give at this point.
And I would like to add to that, we are clear in what we are expecting a resilience plan to look like for projects. And if we receive resilience plans that do not address those particular issues, if there are areas in a community that are excluded for how those problems will be addressed, if they're only addressing particular areas of a community in a resilience plan or resilience strategy, and they are not looking at and documenting the existing social, economic, and natural hazards throughout the community, that there's not an equity-based strategy in place, those plans would not be approved. So we want to be clear with folks that yes, people may already have resilience plans in place. They may have already done a great deal of work. But if those resilience plans do not address whole community, they are not adequate for this program.
The next question, it appears this is following up on the recurrent or repetitive flooding question. I would just call the attention to section 4 and number 2 or page 4 under the overview and authority. Monies in the fund may be used to mitigate. So what it's a matter of construction. Those conditions shall apply to the use of the monies from the fund, but then in number 2, they may be used to mitigate that are subject to. So it is not a requirement. The shall doesn't apply to number 2, but it applies to 1 through 4. And that's just the way sometimes law is written. It's a little bit confusing. But Wendy was correct. It's certainly we would expect those areas to receive attention, and we would be very curious as to why they would not be. But it is not mandatory that those be that the funds are used to do that because because of the use of the word may.
Right. And it speaks to recurrent and or repetitive, not only repetitive and a must.
The next question is, will you review a local resilience plan that hasn't been adopted by the locality if it's prior to the grant period? If there were changes needed, you know, I'm retiring, so before the end of the grant period. So Wendy, why don't you take that one?
Sure. No, we expect to receive a locally adopted resilience plan. We can't, especially with the time frame that we have in place right now, with this very short timeline, of being able to review resilience plans. That's why we have said in the manual that this is not the only funding strategy. If people need time to get their resilience plan in place, another grant round is going to open up in 2 months. There's no detriment to not applying for a project in this first grant round. It is actually to your benefit to ensure that you have a resilience plan that meets the requirements of this program before you apply for a project. So I would encourage you that if you do not have a locally adopted resilience plan that meets the requirement of this plan, not to apply for a project, to take the opportunity to apply for a planning grant to ensure that you can meet the standards of this program.
And again, yeah, I've just put up the schedule again. You know, the second round starts, you know,
September 5th, right?
Yeah,
Or sometime?
August 5th.
August 5th, yeah.
And so it's, you know, things are going to happen pretty quick. And then again, as I said, we're also looking as early in 22 as having another grant round. And so, you know, well, people, I think are feeling a little anxious and urgent about participating in this first grant round. You know, we're coming out of the box with a lot of opportunity over really what is essentially a 7-month period, maybe 8 months, for folks to, you know, absorb the grant manual, work with their local governments, their governing bodies, and those other things. And so certainly we want to get this money out the door, but we also want to make sure that folks are in a position to use it most productively and are forward thinking in how they're planning to use these monies. Next question, can you provide any additional perspective on how ecological goals might compare with economic and public health property goals when scoring applications? There is in the scoring criteria some benefit for the co-benefits for water quality, but it is a relatively small bonus or scoring criteria. I think really what we're most interested in, it isn't really economic or public health property goals as well. It's public safety goals, flood resilience goals. I mean, there's a whole lot of goals that are baked into the underlying statute and that are baked into this manual. And those are reflected in the appendices that show the scoring criteria that we have established for each of the categories. And so I would refer the questioner to those scoring criteria, and that ought to give you a pretty good sense of what we think is important and what we think is less so, but still perhaps should be considered when a grant proposal is being evaluated. Will there be any future guidance on the resiliency plan requirements, compare those to FEMA hazard mitigation plan requirements? Yes, I think it's fair to say that coming right out of the box, the resiliency plan elements are not as well formed, I think, as they will be in the future. And so I would suspect, particularly, I don't think there'll be a lot of change for these first 2 grant rounds because we don't have time to, rewrite a grant manual or add a whole lot, between now and August 5th. But as we move this program into the future, I think, those kinds of questions are going to be addressed. And we will have, more specificity and particulars related to resilience plans. And again, lining those up against other plans. We already address, if you look in Appendix G, some of the things that you would have in a hazard mitigation plan are the kinds of things that we're looking for even in these initial submissions. So if you have further questions on that, send us a note through the email box, and we could have an offline discussion if there are any specific questions related to that. Again, that's the last question I see in the chat. If there aren't any further, Wendy, if you'd like to make any remarks or wrap up, please do.
Certainly, I really appreciate all of you being on the call today. I want you all to know, again, I can't emphasize enough that it is better to apply for a planning grant to ensure your resilience plan is up to par than to send in a resilience plan and a project plan and be denied. The timeline for the second grant round is such that there is no harm in that. Funds that are not awarded in the first grant round or the second grant round for that matter will be made available in future grant rounds. So those dollars will continue to build and roll as we continue to add funding to this project. We are not looking to just fund projects. We are looking to fund projects that meet the resilience goals that we have for the Commonwealth. So this is not going to be, while this has been a very hurried process, there is a thoughtful process behind why we're doing this. So I just want to make sure that everyone understands that there will be opportunity, but build your capacity, build your resilience strategy so that it absolutely covers your community, so that you are more successful.
I would just say amen to Wendy's comments. Again, thank you all for taking the time. You know, we're rolling this out. This is the first, grant round of what will be many. The money doesn't go anywhere. It goes over to VRA. The General Assembly can't take it back. And so, this is a fund that's going to be around for a while. And it is not something that has to be done this summer. We're certainly going to be making grants from this first grant round, but I think the message we're trying to get across is that we want to be in for the long haul. We want to be working with localities, local governments over the long term, and to make Virginia more resilient and better prepared to address flooding, whether it be on the coast or whether it be in the mountains. And so that is the approach that we're taking, looking at this long term. And again, thank you so much for your interest in this. Again, any future, we already have 2 additional question and answer webinars set up, and those are on the page. I'll scroll to that page just so you can see it again. Oops, wrong one. Sorry about that. Right here. You can see that page. So any updates to the program, any addition, the Q&A, the transcript from this, or the recording from this session will be posted there. So that's your go-to spot for this program. And again, as I previously asked, if we can focus questions or inquiries to the email address that is on this page, that would be most helpful for us internally to be able to organize and make sure that we're giving consistent and reliable answers to any inquiries that we get. So without any, I'll give you back a little bit of your day. But again, thank you for taking the time to be with us today. And we look forward to working with all of you and fulfilling the laudable goals of this program. So thank you, and we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.